Okay, so I want to tell you another story about a more normal sign. Here it is. A really extreme example. God speaking the same message simultaneously to both my husband and I in an almost audible voice. Signs that big can be kind of rare. So let me tell you about some other ones. Lately, God has been using deer to give me messages. Yes, deer. These guys. He often uses deer sightings in very obvious ways to give me encouragements and confirmations. Let me explain. So we live in an area where we do see deer fairly regularly. So just seeing deer is not anything extraordinary. But God has his ways of making it clear. A deer will seemingly materialize from thin air in a place I've never seen one before, just at the moment after I have asked God for confirmation about something. Or we will not see any deer at all for an oddly long amount of time, and then one will surprise us immediately after I've asked God for some sort of sign. So these are my deer messages from God. So several years ago at our off-grid property, I was prayer walking through our woods. And now I experience God's presence a lot because I spend a lot of time with him, and he speaks to me in various ways, often. But there have only been a handful of times when God's presence has been almost tangible. Like he's just there. He's just there. And when this happens, it's like we can converse back and forth instantly, real time. And these have been the most precious experiences of my entire life. So this was one of those rare times. We were speaking together as I hiked. God was right there with me. He had already given me all these little gifts as I was walking. There was a brilliant red leaf on the forest floor, this neon blue-tailed lizard, this cool wind whistling through the trees, a squirrel chattering at me, a little bird flitting through the trees. And so I was just in this wonderful moment. And so I got really bold and I asked God, show me a deer. And he smiled. So when I have the few times that I've had this sort of experience where God's presence is so powerful, I can actually feel his smile. That's the only way I can describe it. I can't see him, but I hear him. I feel his presence so powerfully, and I can actually feel him smiling. And he told me, I have to save something for later. So I didn't even realize at the time that he was setting up a future message. He was building our private language. So skip ahead 9 months. We had just moved across the state to where we live now, and we were staying in a condo in Branson while we waited for God to lead us to our new home. Now, I thought I knew what kind of place God had planned for us. We had a list, right? I wanted woods, I wanted 10 acres or more, I wanted farm buildings. I thought we would recognize when we got to the right place, when it matched our list, right? But God had other plans. Craig was out of town when I viewed this property that we live in now. So I viewed it without him, and it did not match my list. There were some undeniable signs, and so I really felt like God wanted me to submit an offer. This was during a time when the real estate market was you would submit an offer, 10 other people would submit an offer. It was really hard to get a property. So I didn't think this meant that we were going to get it. So I called Craig and he agreed, and so I submitted the offer. And then the sellers accepted our offer within 1 hour. And Craig hadn't even seen the property, and it didn't match my list. And so there I was, lying alone in bed that night, freaking out, having a meltdown, terrified that we were screwing up big because this wasn't how I thought God was going to work. And I was crying and fretting and giving myself an ulcer and begging God, please get us out of this if it's a mistake. And so I couldn't sleep. And so around 3 a.m. in the morning, I got up and I walked out into the other room. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement. Don't worry, it's nothing bad. This is like the setup to a horror movie. So outside of the window, there was this beautiful deer, a doe, illuminated by the street light. And she was just nonchalantly walking down the middle of the street. Now, this was the first deer that I had ever seen since we moved here. And I have never seen a deer walk down the middle of the street. Why then? And instantly, I knew that God was giving me a message. He was saying, shh, it's okay. I'm here and I hear you. I immediately remembered that time when I had been in the woods walking with God and asked him, show me a deer. And he said, I have to save something for later. And so I knew immediately that this was the something that he saved for later. 9 months before, when I had asked him, show me a deer. And as I watched, the deer stopped and it walked to the side of the road to munch on some leaves. She stayed there in that spot for 20 minutes. Now, our condo was on the 3rd floor, surrounded by trees. So this doe had appeared and stopped in the tiny little spot of the road that was visible through all the tree leaves from that particular window. If she had been a few feet back or further ahead, I never would have even seen her. That is a sign. And now God continued to give us confirmation about this property. And by the time we closed a month later, we were confident this is the one. This is exactly what he wanted for us. And now we've been here 2.5 years. And so we know that even though this place did not match our original list, it has turned out to be the perfect place for us to homestead. In fact, now we know that if we had gotten the property that matched our list, it wouldn't have even worked for homesteading. We didn't know that back then, but God knew. And through signs, he guided us to exactly the right property. But that first night, when I was all alone, freaking out, he heard my cries and he knew my fears. And he knew 9 months before that I would be all alone and afraid. And he set it all up 9 months before so that I would know that it was him when he sent me that beautiful deer.
Wow. That story still gets me because that was so amazing. It was so intense, just how clearly God was there, his presence, with that deer when I was watching her, and then how he had taken the time and cared to set this up for me. And he will work that way with you too. He wants to work with all of us in these ways. It's just so incredible. And now that is more of a normal sign for me for God to show me a deer or something like that, and it's once you start tuning into these kinds of communications, and remember I talked about spirit radio last week, tuning into God's voice. So once you do that and you start opening up your mind that this is a possibility, then God is very, very capable of providing you with signs that you will recognize. Okay, once you open up your soul and your mind to consider things like this. And after you've been doing this for a while and God started to communicate with you, and then you start to develop a history of God communicating with you in this way. And that is when he starts building this secret language that's just between the two of you, and who knows, I have no idea what that's going to look like between you and God. Only God knows that. And then you'll begin to understand it as you seek God and you surrender to him and he starts speaking to you and communicating with you like this. It will be something meaningful to you, just between you and God. But I will tell you this, that the longer you do this, the more you tune into God, the more you seek God, he can use signs like this for his messages to become very, very clear and very, very detailed and direct. Have you ever had this experience of hearing somebody say, God told me this, or God told me to do this, or God said this to me, something really specific. And have you ever thought, how do you know that? If you've ever thought that, this is what that person was talking about. This is what they mean. This is how God can communicate. Okay, it's beautiful. It is wonderful.